In 1984, the international situation was tense to the extreme. It was one of the peaks of the Cold War. The Iran-Iraq War was raging, claiming hundreds of lives every day and destabilizing the Middle East region. In India, a high-profile political assassination took place. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was shot dead by her own Sikh bodyguards, sparking mass riots across the country. In Poland, anti-communist protests continued unabated. Although suppressed by force, they gradually undermined the ruling party's power, creating the conditions for future political change. Against this backdrop, one of the most dangerous incidents between the USSR and the US in the history of their maritime confrontation occurred in the Pacific Ocean. The Soviet nuclear submarine project 671 Yursh collided with the American aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk, which was carrying nuclear weapons. The Soviet submarine was also carrying a particularly dangerous cargo, torpedoes with nuclear warheads. It was a potential disaster of planetary scale, but fortunately, there were no casualties and no leakage of nuclear materials. In early November, an American strike group led by the Kitty Hawk entered the Sea of Japan. The aircraft carrier had about 100 deck-based aircraft on board and was accompanied by an entire squadron of destroyers, cruisers, and frigates capable of protecting the carrier from any threat. The group was heading for the coast of South Korea to participate in large-scale joint exercises called Team Spirit, which were always perceived in Moscow as a demonstration of force and a means of putting pressure on the USSR and its allies in the region. This did not go unnoticed by the Soviet command. Surface ships and several submarines, including the Project 671 Yursh nuclear submarine, were sent to intercept and observe. Its task was to secretly accompany the American group, record its route, composition of forces, and possible tactical maneuvers. A few days later, submarine K-3014, according to other sources, K-314, detected the American formation and, maintaining secrecy, established constant surveillance of it. After several hours of covert pursuit, the progress of which was regularly reported to headquarters, the Soviet submarine K-314 was nevertheless spotted by the enemy. American ships and aircraft did not simply record its presence, they repeatedly simulated attacks on it, practicing conditional depth charge drops and torpedo strikes. This was a kind of warning. The enemy had spotted the submarine and made it clear that it was ready to engage in actual combat at any moment. Despite this pressure, K-314 continued to carry out its mission, tracking the movements of the powerful American strike group. But at one point, the situation got out of control. During a scheduled communication session with headquarters, it was necessary to raise the antenna, which meant surfacing almost to the surface. In order to avoid visual contact, the commander decided to fall behind the aircraft carrier and its order for a while. While the boat was raising the antenna and exchanging information, the American group moved forward about 15 miles, disappearing over the horizon. The communication session was successful, but time had been lost. K-314 urgently increased speed to catch up with the formation, but the increase in speed led to an increase in noise, and American hydroacoustic stations immediately detected the Soviet submarine. The response was immediate. All flights from the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk were suspended. Some of the ship's radio-electronic equipment was turned off to reduce their own noise and radar visibility, and the entire formation abruptly changed course, entering South Korean territorial waters. Under these conditions, K-314 lost contact with the probable enemy. Further searches were hampered by the complex hydrological conditions of the Sea of Japan and active countermeasures by the Americans. The large anti-submarine ship Vladivostok was sent to assist the submarine. After the Americans reactivated their radio-electronic equipment, their emissions were immediately detected by the Soviet side. The large anti-submarine ship Vladivostok transmitted the latest coordinates of the aircraft carrier group to K-314, and the submarine, following orders, quickly moved to the designated area. The objective remained the same: to resume surveillance of the exercises of a potential adversary, which during the Cold War was considered one of the priority tasks of combat duty. Such operations were routine but extremely risky. The highest skill was considered to be secretly approaching enemy ships at a minimum distance and detecting their onboard frequencies, radar parameters, hydroacoustics, and other equipment. Such missions allowed for the collection of unique intelligence data, acoustic profiles of propellers, system noises, and radio frequencies. For example, in 1968, the Soviet K-10 managed to get close to the American aircraft carrier Enterprise, using the noise of its giant propeller as camouflage, and spent 13 hours recording acoustic characteristics while conducting training torpedo attacks. However, in the case of the K-314, the situation developed much more dramatically. Having risen to periscope depth for another communication session, the submarine commander conducted a visual inspection of the water area and suddenly noticed the navigation lights of American ships moving directly toward them. The distance was rapidly decreasing, and it became clear that the risk of collision was extremely high. Without wasting any time, the commander ordered an emergency dive, hoping to dive under the keels of the passing ships. But literally a few seconds later, when the boat was just beginning to descend, there was a powerful impact. The hull shook, the instruments trembled, and the compartments rang with the sound of metal. The crew had not yet had time to fully comprehend what had happened when a second, equally strong jolt followed. After the emergency surfacing, the crew of K-314, realizing the seriousness of the situation, immediately began checking the compartments and preparing to fight for survival. Each member of the crew took their emergency position, and the pumping systems, firefighting equipment, hatches, and bulkheads were checked. Fortunately, it soon became clear that there was no immediate threat to the submarine's life. No flooding or fires were detected in the compartments, and the pressure in the sturdy hull remained normal. On the American side, the flagship of the strike group, the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk, was damaged. The strike hit the underwater section, seriously damaging the bottom over a length of about 40 meters. One of the holes was located in a tank containing aviation kerosene, and a significant amount of it spilled into the sea. The risk of explosion or fire was extremely high, as there were dozens of nuclear bombs on board intended for deck-based aircraft. Any spark could have resulted in disaster. Soon, anti-submarine helicopters rose above the Kitty Hawk. This was a rare chance for the Americans to get close to the latest Soviet nuclear submarine. They began circling over K-314, taking photos and videos for reconnaissance. On the submarine, in turn, they carefully examined the external damage: torn holes in the light hull, a noticeably deformed propeller, and crumpled fences of retractable devices. These breakdowns deprived K-314 of its propulsion. Independent movement became impossible. The decision was made to tow it. The Soviet nuclear submarine was escorted and delivered to one of the bays on the west coast of the Pacific Ocean, where a dock was waiting for it for repairs. Despite serious damage, the American aircraft carrier managed to reach the Japanese port of Yokosuka, where it underwent urgent emergency repairs to the hull to eliminate fuel leaks and restore minimum combat capability. After the emergency repairs in the Japanese port were completed, the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk set course for the Subic Bay Naval Base in the Philippines. This decision was dictated by the need to conduct a more detailed inspection of the hull and equipment, as well as to replace damaged components. The joint U.S.-South Korean Team Spirit exercises in which it was participating were urgently curtailed, which in itself was a rare occurrence. Such large-scale maneuvers were usually completed even when incidents occurred. Sometime later, after the main damage had been repaired, both ships returned to their fleets and continued their combat service. American experts publicly stated that the Soviet nuclear submarine K-314 was entirely to blame for the collision. According to their version, the actions of its commander were unprofessional and negligent, which led to the submarine ending up in the path of the huge aircraft carrier. Despite these accusations, the U.S. did not officially demand compensation, probably in order not to exacerbate the already tense international situation. According to eyewitness accounts, when K-314 arrived at the base, the crew was met with an extremely harsh reaction from the Soviet command. The Pacific Fleet leadership was furious. In their eyes, the crew had made a gross mistake by failing to detect large surface targets in time and prevent a dangerous encounter. Everyone was promised serious consequences, but in the end, the punishment was relatively lenient. The commander was removed from his post and transferred to shore duty. At the same time, the American command also had complaints, this time about their own sonar operators, who for some unknown reason failed to detect the approach of the Soviet nuclear submarine. In real combat conditions, such a mistake could have cost the aircraft carrier and its escort ships dearly. The further fate of those involved in the incident varied. In 1985, the K-314 suffered a serious accident in its nuclear steam generator, and 4 years later it was withdrawn from the Navy. The submarine was stored at a decommissioned base for a long time until it was finally scrapped in 2011. After repairs in 1984, the Kitty Hawk returned to service and continued to serve until the early 2000s. In 2009, the aircraft carrier was decommissioned from the U.S. Navy and subsequently used for training purposes and scrapped.